Welcome to the first briefing by the opposition in this new term. I am PHILLIP, the leader of opposition business. To my left is Anthony Hilton, the Member of Parliament for Western St. Andrew and spokesman on competitiveness, etc. Yes. To my right is Maurice Guy, spokesman on health and well-being. And to his right is Lothan Cousins, spokesman on agriculture and rural development. Today we want to address two matters. The first one has to do with the issue of the sessional committees, and then the other matter has to do with the crisis in education. And my colleagues, both Angela Brown-Burke, the spokesperson on education, and Julian Robinson, the spokesperson on technology, will be addressing that matter. Mark Goldin has joined us. Right, our spokesman on finance and planning. All right, so in relation to the issue surrounding the sessional committees, we want to reiterate our call for the immediate reinstatement of the opposition's chairmanship of all sessional committees of the House of Representatives. We are making this call, and we are claiming that the government's position on the change to the opposition chairing of committees has been disingenuous and unfair. We are also stating that it is going to undermine the best practices of maintaining a high standard of accountability. The government failed to state the real reason for the change in what has become a convention. This has worked well in the role that we have performed in scrutinizing policies, expenditure, and exposing maladministration and corruption, including breaches in the hiring practice and procurement procedure. It appears now that with its more than two-thirds majority, the government has decided to pursue a strategy to cover up and to prevent the work of the opposition as oversight. The argument that the government has put forward is really a ruse, because meetings of the other committees apart from the PAC and the PAC were curtailed due to limited space at Gordon House and a shortage of secretarial support services, and really not a lack of interest by the opposition at all. In fact, many times the government members were unavailable for such meetings. And when they did attend, some of them, they would invoke Clause 77.7 of the standing orders, which states that for the committees to hear matters, these matters must be referred to the committees by the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the JLP majority. And as I said last week, this was not the first attempt by the government to curtail the work of the opposition. In fact, they attempted last year to change the chairmanship of the PAAC, and that was resisted strenuously by us and the public, and they thereafter backed off. we want to say that we recognize that the government has a significant majority and they can do pretty much what they want because it's over 2/3. But we, as guardian of the Constitution, of the role that we play as oversight, we intend to resist this. But we are prepared to have discussions, we are prepared to meet, as has been some of the recommendations from civil society, to meet with the government to see how we can do a comprehensive review of this matter and other matters relating to the standing orders to ensure that we can resume the role of opposition chairing these committees. We're prepared to look at the issue of the government in terms of joint or deputy chairman of these committees, and also to decide on a specific schedule by which these committees would meet to ensure that not only the PAC and the PAAC are meeting, but all of these sessional committees. We again call upon the government for support in terms of space and secretarial staffing to assist us. In fact, the assistance has to be broader. Not many people are aware that parliamentarians do not get research assistance to assist us in the work that we do. I think it is full time now, as we expect the Parliament to be far more robust, that opposition members be provided with this type of technical support to enable us to do the work that we have to do. Now, there are a couple of members who would just like to speak on this matter as well before we take questions. And as I mentioned before, afterwards, we intend to deal with the issue of education, the crisis in education. So my colleague, Tony Hilton, and my colleague Maurice Gann, I'm sure the chairman of the PAC would also like to come in on this matter before we get on to the issue of education.
I think it's very important to recognize that the circumstances we are in now necessitate the society as a whole ensuring that our democracy is protected and that the interests of open and transparent governance are furthered by our parliamentary arrangements. Coming out of the last election, the governing party has what I would call a supermajority in Parliament. They have more than 2/3 of the seats. And that enables them to pass legislation, even constitutional amendments, in the lower house. It is in that context that I believe it is a retrograde step for Jamaica's democracy, for the convention that has been followed by both sides since 2007, that the opposition names the chairman of the sessional committees, has been abandoned by the current government. As has been said, attempts were made in the last government for them to do so. Those who resisted successfully. However, perhaps emboldened by their election win, they have determined that they are pushing through with it. And despite being asked in Parliament last week, Tuesday, not to do so, the Prime Minister insisted, nevertheless, that they were going to proceed with this. And the reasons given are, frankly, spurious. The performance of the opposition has been impacted, as it was when the JLP were in opposition, by the arrangements at Parliament which are unsatisfactory and inadequate for our 21st century democracy. The building itself only has one chamber. The other meeting rooms are not adequately spacious to accommodate sessional committee meetings with public sector staff coming to answer questions and the parliamentary staff who service the committee meetings being present. As a result, given the nature of each week's activities, with the House itself meeting on a Tuesday afternoon, sometimes on a Wednesday afternoon, the Senate on a Friday, MPs being in their constituency typically on a Thursday, and Cabinet meeting on a Monday, there's little time and inadequate space for scheduling all the meetings of these various committees. Plus, the PAC and the PAAC, because of their constitutional importance, are given priority when it comes to scheduling. It has meant that for many years, the other sessional committees have not functioned as they should. It is nothing to do with who chairs them. It is very important that the opposition continue to chair them so that the government can be held accountable for the actions of the executive. It is naive and disingenuous to assume that a committee chaired by the government side is going to hold the government to account. We all know the nature of our politics. That will not happen. So I'm very pleased that civil society organizations have come on board and have issued press releases supporting the call for the continuation of the convention established in 2007. And I would ask that they continue to agitate for this as we are doing so today. Thank you.
It did not only take members of parliament to recognize that part of the challenge is why we have not been able to have these meetings that the Prime Minister spoke about in Parliament and suggested that there was some amount of hypocrisy. The Parliament is unable to deal with these committees. In fact, I've sat on committees before, even the PAC, where we've been asking for other meetings, and we have been told that the clerk, the unit, secretarial unit that deals with these committees is unable to give us a particular date. You would notice that it is only in very rare circumstances that you will have more than one committee being held simultaneously, whether it is in the Parliament or elsewhere. And I say it did not only take us as members. As far back as a report commissioned by the Jamaican government in 2011, done by the World Bank, the recommendations that came out was that the Jamaican Parliament, one, lacked the resources to deal with the committee meetings, lacked some amount of space. They also put in a pitch for a new Parliament building in that particular recommendation. They spoke to the need, as Member Paulwell a while ago mentioned, the need to have clerks who would do research for the members of Parliament, and spoke to a whole litany of failures by our parliamentarian to deal with the work simply because we have not been given the proper tools. So to suggest that part of the reason why the committees have not met was because the members of Parliament from the opposition side were not interested in having this meeting, as Member Paulwell said, is really a ruse.
I just like to just share my own experience as a chairman of one of the committees who felt the constraints in having these meetings. It was not for a lack of interest. In fact, we many times have been agitating just so the opportunity to have these meetings. What is reflected is the number of meetings we've had. What is not reflected is the number of meetings that were set and cancelled, either because one, either there are some other pressing business in the PAC or the PAC, or the members, we just didn't have a quorum, or we just couldn't get persons available for the meeting. To say that what the government has presented is a ruse, I think is fairly transparent. You need not look any further than look at the situation in the Economy and Production Committee that I chaired. We couldn't have meetings sometimes because the members were not available. The current chairperson, the person who has been elevated to the chair of the committee, as I think came to one meeting, if I recall, my recollection, the person came to one meeting of the Economy and Production Committee, and yet somehow the others of us were inefficient, and the person is vaulted to the position of chairman of the committee. So it really is a ruse, and I'm glad that civil society and the opposition continue to press the issue because of its fundamental importance to our democracy.
I believe, as the leader of opposition business said, it's a crisis in education. And from the statement of the minister last week in Parliament, we were concerned, and we had made some statements and made some queries. So yesterday marked the official start of the 2020-2021 academic year. And the usual hitches and teething pains at the beginning of the year were, quite frankly, exacerbated by the changes demanded by the pandemic and the fact that we were not ready for them, as well as what I would call ignoring the systemic inequities that we have in our education system. So despite the government's bold statement that no one will be left behind, several students were unable to fully participate because of the lack of devices, difficulties with access to internet, access or reliability to electricity. And the stories abound of classes abandoned because data done, or shared devices that just made it too difficult for persons. Then also we have persons even opting out of university because they just can't afford to acquire the learning tools that are required at this time. The same inequity means that there are schools where almost 100% of the students are familiar with being online and have no intimidation with the new normal that we are creating. But there are others who simply don't have that kind of access nor that familiarity. Some don't even have TV, much less internet services. And it seems to me that the government is unaware that families are still struggling to provide solutions where they have multiple children at home, often in different grades or even different schools, that there are some families who don't even have food to give their children, or that there is a real struggle for some parents to assist with structure, discipline, content, and learning tools all at the same time. It seems that the government really does not recognize the inequality that exists. There are schools who can expect 80% or more to join online classes without any problem. And then there are schools that are struggling to get 15%, 20% engaged. That is the reality. One would almost be excused for believing that in the 6 months or so that school has been out, no one was preparing for the opening of school, and that maybe other activities were what were preoccupying the minds of those who had the responsibility of getting our schools and our children ready for the start of the year. From my discussions with some of the stakeholders, it is clear that one size will not fit all. That cannot be the answer. For example, if you have smaller schools, I know of a school with 75 students, total population, 100 students, total population. They just don't have the same conditions as other schools. Some of them might have 90% of their students coming from the same locale, which means that they're walking to school. I believe that collaboration, discussion, dialogue with the stakeholders in the education sector would be able, as we do say in education, have a solution that is student-centered. It is a sector that believes in adapting a curriculum and an approach that has the student at the center. And what that means is that the peculiarities at the local level have to be taken into consideration when one is designing solution. As I said, the solutions for education require a broad stakeholder participation. And it really requires honest dialogue about what's happening, what's possible, and how we chart this new path. Let's not waste the opportunity that we have for rebooting education that reduces inequality and puts an end to the apartheid with which we have been living for far too long.
The crisis that we face in education is one that could have been predicted from March when we had the onset of COVID. Predicted in the sense that we were not clear about how COVID would spread, but there was certainly the high probability that we would not have face-to-face school. Given that, we would have thought that the government would have made arrangements to prepare itself for the likelihood of online classes being the mode of learning. And certainly where we are now at the beginning of October, it is highly unlikely that we'll have face-to-face classes before the end of this calendar year. So at best, we are probably going to, if the pandemic eases, we may have the possibility of face-to-face classes in January. Now, we raised the issue of the use of technology in education from months ago. I raised it again last week in Parliament. The minister gave some answers which, frankly, didn't address the scope of the problem. So I was more than surprised yesterday when, by her own admission, she has acknowledged that 400,000 Jamaican students will not have access to school because they don't have the instruments or internet access. Again, this is something that could have been predicted. We have 600,000 students in our system. As I said last week, maybe 100,000 can afford, the parents can afford to buy the devices, may have connections at home. You may have another set who can, but the vast majority of Jamaican students parents simply cannot afford devices or stable internet access at home. We made recommendations from months ago, and I am really disappointed that the recommendations that we made have not been acted upon. The first thing we said is that the government should use taxation policy to ease the burden on parents by making these devices cheaper, by lifting the GCT and other applicable duties. The reason we said that is, even with the best will in the world, if the government delivers all the technology it has, it can't impact more than 70 to 75,000 students. So you're going to have a large cross-section, as is now acknowledged by the minister, who will not be able to access education. Removing GCT at minimum would ease the burden by at least 15% and maybe more on the cost of the tablets. And the reality is that the tablets provide the cheapest source of access for students. Laptops are ideal and probably better, but they are a lot more expensive. The second thing we said, and this is an issue which has been ongoing for months, the government, through e-learning, had a problem with one of the providers. It ended up in court, and it is now the subject of legal action. The provider has brought in 19,000 tablets. These tablets have been in the country from earlier this year. We recommended that the government initiate mediation. And the reason we say mediation is we are in extraordinary times. The company has brought in 19,000 tablets. Some of these tablets are being used right now in schools. They have been found to be functional and efficient. E-learning has said they don't meet their specifications. We said appoint somebody independently to assess the tablets and determine whether they can work, because they are being used. That hasn't been done. So you have a protracted legal battle between the government and this provider, where 19,000 tablets are in the country and they're not being utilized. But yet still we have 400,000 Jamaican students without access. The third thing, after that legal issue with Geotech, the government initiated another procurement to bring in the 40,000 tablets. These tablets have been in the country from August. Before Parliament went on break, before the election, I said, and I implored, I said, begin the distribution from then. Why? Because it would give the kids an opportunity to get to know the instruments. The distribution time frame for delivering 40,000 tablets is about 4 to 6 weeks. So if you started then, the kids would have been ready for school at the beginning of the school year. When you start the distribution last week, Friday, October 2nd, it's going to take you 6 weeks to distribute all of these tablets. What happens in the interim? The 36,000 tablets that the government projects for non-PAULWELL students, they're going to have a challenge getting the devices. Why? Because there's a worldwide shortage of laptops and computer devices, because every country in the world is facing the same problem we are. So even the projection of the 36,000 tablets is not likely to happen before the end of this year, because you simply cannot get devices from manufacturers. and from suppliers. And countries are going to hold on to those devices for their own purposes. So the reality is that we're going to have students who have been out of school from March of this year, and many who will not be able to access education for the rest of the year. Now, this is not an issue that you can blame on COVID, because we knew this would have happened from March. It is a failure to plan adequately why we are where we are. And there are other options the government can utilize. The Universal Service Fund builds out an island-wide broadband network. We left it in 2016, connecting schools, post offices, community access points. Libraries, etc. Right now, what you need to do as a matter of urgency, those community centers, those libraries need to be connected so that the kids who can't access, let's say they even have a phone, right? They can go somewhere and access the internet. That is a quick win that can facilitate students in this short term having access to online classes. That can be done as a matter of urgency, and it needs to be done, because the kids who are being left behind are the poor kids. They're not the kids who have a data plan at home. They're not the kids who have 1 or 2 tablets. They are the poor kids with a single mother who has 3 children and only has 1 phone. Every single member of parliament can attest to the number of requests that we are getting from our constituents for tablets. And we can't respond to them. People can try personally as best as they can to see how they can deal with the issue. But the reality is we are going to lose potentially a generation who would lose an entire year of education. And in my view, it is caused by a failure to plan. And we have made specific recommendations that we believe can alleviate the problem. The minister will be making a statement in the House today. I don't know what she will say, but I hope the government at least embraces some of the things that have been put on the table. We run a real risk of a set of youngsters who will lose a year of school and may not be able to catch up. And we can take corrective action now to alleviate the problem.
In regards to education, I'm really curious and very anxious to find out in terms of, again, the mechanism, because at home, if you have 30 in a class or 35, and you're going to start teaching, and you can't teach right across the board just like that. I'm wondering, when it comes to the communication between teacher and student, what mechanism will be used, because I'm certain there are going to be problems in terms of 3 or 4 students probably taking over while the others will not be able to participate. So I'm wondering if there's going to be some assistant teachers in various classes so that they'll be able to assist in doing going forward. And I'm going back again to recommendation in terms of the electronic devices and the internet. I am making a recommendation that the government find some transport, I would say a minibus or something of the sort, that can be properly equipped to go into the rural areas and become like a hotspot, because that would have helped tremendously because of the geography of this country. I am certain that don't care what you do, there are going to be some schools left behind. So my recommendation is that they find transportation that can be fully equipped to send in to some of these deep rural areas.
As a member of parliament with one of the largest constituencies in the country, if not the largest, deep rural areas, in speaking to many of the stakeholders in my constituency, it is clear that the government was not ready for this paradigm shift. We have serious internet access problems in the rural areas. We have serious issues as it relates to young people having the mechanisms to download the information, and the information was sent late. I certainly believe, even on Sunday when the minister came into St. Anne, where she went into Brownstown, and I believe to another school up in southwest St. Anne, the political urgency of public relations was more important than designing the mechanisms to make sure that we were ready, as my colleague Julian had actually said. And the problems with it is that she gave out only tablets as a public relations opportunity, I believe, rather than understanding the real internet issues that are at play in these areas. The United Nations has a very, very interesting approach to use satellite technology for low Earth stations to provide voice and data. And they do it in countries that are much bigger than Jamaica. We have schools in the rural areas, community centers, public libraries, hotspots. And when I looked at the cost as a member of parliament to provide private Wi-Fi, it's about $2,000 to provide the hardware for this private Wi-Fi, and then $500 to maintain the Wi-Fi over the course of the month. Now, residents can't afford that. I have mothers in my constituency who have not been working in the hotel sector since March. They don't have the money. Right now, they're choosing between buying a phone card to provide the data on their phone versus food. This is where we find ourselves. And the anger that I feel as a member of parliament is because millions of dollars were spent on an election. But then you rush into a school year, and now where is the money coming from? Where is the money coming from? And so I meet with principals again on Thursday to try and figure it out. I was speaking to some of my colleagues right here, Julian, Angela, Lothan, I spoke to Mark, others. Right now, every day in my office, I have mothers who are asking for tablets. A tablet is $20,000. A computer at courts is about $52,000. These are the prices that we're confronting. We don't have any more CDF. I don't know about anybody here, but we don't have any more CDF either. And even to procure the tablets, the schools are telling us that the government is asking them to procure the tablets. It is going to take forever for them to even do it, and they don't have the budgets to do it. We find ourselves in a real problem, and I really wish the government would get off of its PR campaigning for opportunities to take pictures just to show that they're actually doing something that is peripheral and really try and solve this issue for people's lives. It is not going to work, and we're going to have children, because the mothers, some of them, can't conduct the training classes. They have teachers who want to give extra classes. They really need to get off their high horse, come into the areas, talk to the people, encourage the SDC to actually help where they can, so that we can fix the problem once and for all. It is really, if you all as a media come on the ground, it is a disaster.
For the general election, would have been better spent on this
I'm saying that there were millions that were found during general election campaigns by the government. And instead of using some of those funds that they were using to campaign and to do a number of different things, as my colleague and all of us are saying, yes, I'm saying that, that money could have been spent making sure that parents were equipped, that they understood the internet issues that were at play in deep rural constituencies, that they provided the hotspots, because if you looked at what the private hotspots are, they're very, very expensive. Very, very expensive. All of us here have been trying to look, as members of parliament, for setting up, just bringing in private contractors to look at what this is going to cost. It's not cheap. They have the money in the budget. If you go back to the estimates of expenditure, when we had when we had standing finance earlier this year, the minister herself, when she was the minister in charge of energy and technology, said that they were going to universally provide internet hotspots across the island. There is a budget, I believe it was about 700 million, Julian? I don't remember what the figure, but if you go back into the public bodies book, you will see that line item. Ask her where it is. Ask her if she's still going to do it, or the other minister, who is Darren Vaz, is going to do it. Ask them which constituencies they're going to put it in. Because she came to Northwest, she came to Southwest. She never came to Southeast and Tan. So since there are 14 of us on this side, I want to know, even if they're going to be providing hotspots, tablets, are they coming to any of the PMP constituencies? Does anybody here know? We don't know. We don't know what lists they're using. Huh? We don't even know when they're coming to some of our constituencies. And in the same way that what they're doing with the committees, all I say is education is not to be a political football that they use as a part of their campaigning going forward. It's not fair to children. It's not.
Do you think that is still happening right now? They're using education as a political.
But I just told you, the minister, David Williams, came and gave out tablets in constituencies in Senegal. There is a roster, I'm told, of constituencies where that is being done. I know, I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm sure it is the case, that none of us have been consulted to say, boy, Lisa, we want to come in and give you internet or provide some of your schools with tablets. I haven't been called. Julian, have you been called? Logan, have you been called? Angela, have you been called?
They've been to Southeast Clarendon, not Southwest Clarendon.
They've been to Southeast Clarendon, not Southwest Clarendon. Southeast Clarendon is the Member of Parliament is Mr. Colonel Charles, Minister Charles. Howard Logan Cousins is the Member of Parliament for Southwest Clarendon. So you all as journalists also have to look at this. Let us stop playing politics with education, right? This is not the time to do it. Not the time to do it. Both PMP and JLP, need education.
Many children don't have devices, or as Julian said, they may have one phone for the family with 3 or 4 children of school age in the home. Many of them don't have Wi-Fi at home because they can't afford a data plan. I wrote to Minister Williams when she was Minister of Energy and Technology to ask her early this year if the fiber optic cable that had been brought down to Spanish Town Road could be used to create a series of hotspots across my constituency, covering areas of Trenchtown, Jonestown, and so on, Rosetown, using public buildings that are available, churches or whatever would be appropriate. I don't think it has got the urgent response that was warranted, given that we're in the COVID time and online learning, everybody knows, was going to be the paradigm that the government would have to move to. There needs to be a much more urgent response to this issue of bringing Wi-Fi to the people, bringing internet to the people, especially in densely populated areas. It's not beyond the government to put a series of hotspots in a densely populated area. I'm glad that Ready TV is collaborating with the government to try and bring some solution to rural Jamaica. I don't know how far that has reached. But the problem is island-wide.